What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 3 of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Tim Bridgewater. If you happen to be someone that's just listening to me for the first time, I also hosted a podcast called Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Super podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Talked about Dragon Ball Super for about 146 episodes, more or less. I think that might be right on the dot, though, if you include the most recent episode that I did, which was basically letting everyone know that I was starting a new podcast, and that is this one, Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast. So thank you guys. If you came over from that podcast and you're here now, I want to thank you again for sticking with me, coming over, giving this new podcast a chance. And if you're listening to me for the first time, I thank you for clicking the play button and checking it out. You should keep listening. I promise you'll like it. Okay, just take it from my previous listeners. I think you'll get a kick out of this. At the very least, it'll help you kill some time. So thank you guys for being super supportive in that way as we dive into this new series, which of course has obviously been very hit or miss in terms of the reaction of the series as far as what I've noticed so far. Of course, I don't do a lot of research on these things because I don't want to stumble into spoiler territory, given that the sub version of this show has been out for a couple months. But we are currently on episode 3 of the English dub. So that's what we talk about here. We only talk about the English dub. So we're just going to try to make our way through this episode by episode. And hopefully, things will get interesting here at some point. I'm going to go ahead and say this right now, right, just at the start of the episode. This particular episode of Dragon Ball Daima wasn't my favorite. Okay, was not my favorite. We'll get into it in a minute. We'll get deep into it. Don't worry about it. But I just want to go ahead and just say that this will be, if you're listening to me for the first time, I love Dragon Ball. I love Dragon Ball Z. I love this entire world. I had a love-hate relationship with Dragon Ball Super. I do not hesitate to talk about the episodes that I don't like and the reasons why I don't like them. But instead of just, throwing out random insults about the episodes, I'll tell you why, and I'll kind of break things down and we'll go through it and we'll discuss it such like that. But we will come back around to the episode talk very, very soon. I did want to touch upon this. Not my previous podcast, but the one before that one. It's a podcast called Republic City Report, a Legend of Korra podcast where I talk about the successor to Avatar: The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra. So if you happen to be someone who is thinking about watching that show because you're just now starting to get into the Avatar world, Avatar: The Last Airbender is my other favorite animated show of all time, with one of them being Dragon Ball Z, and Avatar is the other one. And Legend of Korra is pretty high up there too. I would say it's in my top 10 for sure. But I covered books 2 through 4, I think it is, over there on that podcast. So if you're thinking about watching that show and you like this podcast, well, you should listen to that one. I did record that podcast before I did Rock the Dragon and Dragon Ball Super podcast. Okay, so it might be a little bit weird to hear me, because that podcast was recorded probably 10 years ago at this point. It's crazy to think about that, but it's a little bit older. But my approach is pretty much very, very similarly, where I just go in depth with each episode and talk about it and dive into it. And I probably dive into it a lot more on that podcast about that show than I do here with this Dragon Ball stuff, because let's just face it, this Dragon Ball stuff isn't that deep. Okay, Dragon Ball is a very, very surface level fun show. A lot of silly shit going on, a lot of cool fight scenes, a lot of great, incredible action and animation, and a lot of really, really great moments of power and triumph with the characters. But it's not really anything super deep that needs to be analyzed on a super deep level. So sometimes, I may not be able to do that with an episode because it just may not be there. But I'm saying all of that to say this. If you are a fan of Republic City Report, and that is a podcast that you are considering listening to, or maybe you already heard it, that podcast is now available on Spotify. Okay. I did the research. Spotify started launching their podcast versions. They added podcasts to their app about 1 year after I ended that podcast. So that podcast never had a chance to be on Spotify. It was mostly on Apple Podcasts. Back then it was called iTunes, but I finally got around to getting Republic City Report on Spotify. Why, Tim? It's old. Who cares? Well, because it's funny to me that podcast is starting to come up a lot more in conversation. I'm having listeners bring up the fact that they also listened to that one. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, so people are still listening to Republic City Report. I mean, some of the things that I talk about in there are going to would have been timely for the time the podcast was released. So not all of it's going to make sense now. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that probably I probably talk about websites and Facebook pages that don't exist anymore because, it's an older podcast. But if you're just watching the show, if you're just watching The Legend of Korra for the first time, then you can still enjoy it. You can still check it out. I still do, I do reviews of every single episode. So if you're someone who's been mostly a Spotify user and you've been wanting to check out Republic City Report, now's a good time to give it a shot, I would say. So I might have more announcements regarding that, maybe, possibly, but we'll see how this does with it being on Spotify now, and then we'll just kind of see how it goes from there. Okay. Anyway, I did want to jump over to Facebook for 1 second and acknowledge a listener by the name of Matt, who sent me a very, very cool message, and I just wanted to share that. If you'd like to send me something, remember you can send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com for our email segment, which is called What Are You Saying? And I do have a couple of emails here that I'm going to read on this episode that we're going to swing back around to after the episode talk. And in addition to that, I also have an Instagram for the podcast at Rock the Dragon Podcast. So please jump over there, give that page a follow. I have been posting quite a bit of reels lately. So if you want to see a video version of some of the topics that we talk about on the podcast, not everything, because I'm going to save a lot of that stuff for the podcast. The audio podcast is still the primary version of this podcast. So this is where you'll get everything. But if you happen to be on Instagram, you can get some, specific clips regarding specific topics that we may talk about during the episode in a video format. And if you're just wondering what the hell I look like, by some chance, you can go over there and see it. Okay. I'm not promising much. Okay. I'm just saying, if you're just curious, you can go check it out. Okay. But anyway, I want to touch upon Matt's comment here because I thought it was very, very cool. Matt sent me in a message and it says, there were some things that, that preceded this, but this was the most recent thing that was sent here. It says, Tim, I'm stoked to see you started up again with Daima. Definitely going to listen in. Happily to finally listen in real time as everything was already out for the Super podcast by the time I heard it. So cool to see it back on and to have some positive, fun stuff to listen to with all the crazy going on right now. Thank you. Good luck with it again. Good luck with it again. Such a vibe. Matt, I just wanted to thank you so much, man, for saying that. Okay. I don't know if I've had anyone else kind of phrase it like that, calling it a vibe. I've definitely had people talk about, it's just very laid back, easy to listen to and kind of and things like that. That word vibe, I really, really, I kind of latch on to that though, because that's just one of my favorite words to use. I like to describe myself as kind of a vibey sort of a guy in real life. So I like that you use that word. I just want to thank you for saying that. And there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And if I can take everyone's minds off of that for fucking, 30 minutes, an hour, once a week, then I'm happy to do so. And it's also still very, very amazing to me how many people caught my previous podcast toward the end of it. So you didn't really get a chance to say anything, but now you're coming back now with a new podcast and taking the opportunity to speak up. So if you have anything you'd like to say, if you've been kind of holding back some hopefully positive words to say about the podcast, you can also message me or send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, we're going to swing back around to the emails. We're going to go ahead and jump right on into the episode talk for this week. So this episode of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast, is going to cover episode 3 of Dragon Ball Daima, titled Daima. Interesting. Okay. Even more interesting than that, though, is the fact that they don't, unless I'm missing something, they don't really go out of their way to explain to us what that means. I think if most of us have probably just kind of, a lot of you guys have watched the sub, and even if you haven't, maybe you're familiar with that term from previous Dragon Ball things like Piccolo, Daimeo. I believe that was what Piccolo's King Piccolo's name was in the Japanese version. Don't quote me on that because I'm a little bit confused on that. Okay, because I remember I only watched the dubs. Okay, but from what I understand, Daima means demon in Japanese. Okay, so that's something I didn't really talk about much when they announced the name of the show and on episode 0 of the podcast or anything. But yeah, it means demon, and they're going into the demon realm, these demon worlds. So they happen to call the episode Daima. Now, I just think I feel like maybe they should have mentioned that somewhere in the presentation of the show for those people that didn't feel the need to Google that to see what it meant. Okay, and maybe they do. But yeah, anyway. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, at the start of this episode is really not that great. Look, listen, it's not the worst thing. We get it's really, really slow, and there's a lot of sort of introductory kind of exposition-y types of things that happen in this episode. So, I'll just talk about it to the best of my ability. But when we get episodes that don't have a lot going on, there's not really a lot to talk about. So let's just jump into it, and we'll kind of, obviously, as I always do, I'll elaborate on things as we come across them. So this episode basically begins with Goku and Supreme Kai and Glorio, and they're just kind of cruising through space in the spaceship. And here's where we start to learn a little bit more about where they are, where they're going, how this transportation between realms tends to work here. And while we are kind of seeing a lot of the same stuff that we've already seen, because remember, this kind of ties into one of my initial problems with this episode is that we spend a lot of time going back through areas that we've already gone through because remember, we came through this area already with Goma and Degasu, right? The only difference is that now we're just getting like an explanation of what this is while it's happening. So there's something weird about that because I feel like maybe we could have gotten that explanation the first time we saw it, or they could have just saved this whole thing for this episode, because I don't think we needed to see them go through all of this stuff as well and then explain it to us at the same time, because a lot of the stuff that's being mentioned here is kind of, it's a little bit convoluted, and what I mean by that is there's a lot of information kind of being thrown at us at once. There's a lot of terms being thrown at us about the demon world and demon kings in the demon realm. And Sir Warp is, of course, the name of this huge goldfish-like thing that exists in space that appears to be the gateway to entering other realms. I'm assuming there's more than just the demon realm. Is there an angel realm too? Is there a devil realm? Is there but all we're really learning about here is the demon realm. So we learn a little bit about Sir Warp during this process, and they're cruising by this other planet. And there's a moment where Supreme Kai has to stop and says, okay, let's just pause here for a minute because I want to make sure Kibito knows where we are, because we have to remember that Kibito is back on planet Earth with the other Z fighters, with Vegeta and Piccolo, and they're waiting for Supreme Kai's ship to get upgraded so that they can come and join this adventure as well, which I'm just assuming that's going to happen. But if you watch the opening credits, you can see that, Piccolo and Vegeta are going to get involved in this thing too. So we get a couple moments here between, we get this interaction between Sir Warp and Goku. And Goku, Goku's just being Goku. Okay? Which I don't have a problem with that. This is Goku. But they're definitely, I feel like they're now that he's a kid again, they're making him even more kiddie feeling, which I guess, it's kind of a interesting dynamic to kind of think of him like that, because on the one hand, I understand why they're doing this, because they're kids now. So they kind of have to behave like kids a little bit in order for this to make any sense or to be any fun or whatever it is they're trying to channel by going this direction. it's probably going to come across better story-wise if they make them act a little bit more like kids, right? Because if they're just completely the same as they were before, then that would make this probably even an even tougher sell, I would say. But it's a little easier, of course, with Goku because he's so super fucking kiddie anyway. So, but they're definitely dialing it up quite a bit here with Goku, and you know, I'm not gonna bitch about it anymore. I'm gonna suspend my disbelief about it because you have to do that on this show. But when they do stuff like this, it just makes it feel even more unbelievable that Goku is an actual adult who has 2 kids and a wife, right? Because when you see him here, it's hard to think of him like that. And that didn't just start with this. I mean, even in Super, I feel like they dialed Goku's personality back a couple notches and made him way more goofy than certainly the way he was in Dragon Ball Z in the English dub that we got, the initial dub. But it's also well known that they sort of made Goku into an Americanized superhero type because they didn't want to, they felt like American audience, not just American audiences, you know, viewers of the English dub wouldn't necessarily be able to accept Goku being as, you know, naive and sort of aloof that he is. So they made him a little bit more, you know, a superhero archetype in that original run of Dragon Ball Z. And that, of course, being my favorite version of this, I'm always going to think about that. You know, I'm always going to prefer that version. So in Super, when they brought him in, he was super, you know, just, you know, I'm not a big fan of that version of Goku. I understand that version is probably more accurate, but at this point, I'm just kind of missing the way he used to be. But that's not really a complaint. I'm just a commentary on what we're seeing here. So we get a moment where Supreme Kai actually makes Goku's ears grow out. Okay, because they have to prove that they're from the demon world in order to cross over into this other, you know, into the demon realm. So I guess that's the only indication. I mean, is that the only thing? Is that these ears have to be demon or long? I mean, I don't know, because it'll be very, very interesting. And then of course you have to have a pin code, but it'll be very interesting to see how Vegeta makes his way to the demon world, because he doesn't have ears like that, right? Kibito and Piccolo will be fine, but Vegeta wouldn't be. Well, stands to reason that maybe Kibito has the same ability that Supreme Kai has, and that is to make Vegeta have long ears. So maybe we'll see that, maybe we won't, maybe they'll just jump ahead and they'll already be there. I don't know. But they keep bringing up the fact that Kibito does not know the pin code, and Supreme Kai is kind of worried about that. So we don't know how they're going to kind of bypass that. Now, he does try to reach out to Kibito at the last second to give him that information, but it's not clear if it really went through or not. Well, no, he says it's too late. I can't reach him. Okay. So maybe they'll find their way over there through some other means. Now, like I said, there's nothing in terms of what we're seeing here. There's nothing wrong with what we're seeing. Everything looks great animation wise, but we've already seen this. I mean, we saw Goma and Degasu go through all of this same stuff, these exact same locations, you know, and we just didn't get the explanation of everything that we're getting now. But because we've already seen it, it just feels a little bit repetitive, and I'm not sure that we needed to see this again. Though I do have to admit that it is kind of fascinating to see Goku's reaction to all of this. I don't know. I just feel like it was kind of a wasted time. I think there could have been a better way to show all of this and let us know what everything was without us having to see it twice, especially in just 2 episodes. Now we're seeing it again. Okay. And once again, like I said, all the information that they're giving us is kind of convoluted. We're learning a lot. We're learning that there are 3 demon worlds and we're in the demon realm, and each world has its own king, and you can only access certain worlds through other worlds with certain levels of clearance. It's just a lot of shit that I hope it ends up meaning something, and that it's not just, you know, just random exposition at this point. Because now, you know, It's totally okay. Sometimes we get series or movies or TV shows where they start off like this and they're throwing so much information at us that it's hard to really absorb what they're talking about, because these are things that we haven't seen and people and characters we haven't met yet. But that doesn't mean that it won't turn out okay. I mean, Game of Thrones notoriously was like that too. Okay, if you watch Game of Thrones and you go watch the first, couple of episodes of that, you're going to be completely lost. They're going to be throwing out all kinds of names and locations and people and shit. You're going to be like, I don't know what any of this is. And that can, that can deter you from wanting to stick with it. But then gradually you stick with it and you start to learn these names and places and people. And then, it turned into one of the best shows of all time until it ended as one of the worst shows of all time, in my opinion. But that's another topic. We don't have to get into that. Okay. So I'm just kind of glossing over a lot of this introductory stuff to this third, I believe it's the third demon world that they're on, because once again, we've seen a lot of this. Now we're just getting to see it through Goku's eyes. We're getting an actual look at the terrain and the environment and the sky and the clouds. And we're getting some more information. Apparently each one of these worlds has essentially a portal that leads to, it's called a Demon Realm Tunnel. I feel like the word portal might have been a little bit better there, but I guess, whatever. But they connect the three worlds together. And at one point, you were able to relatively easily travel between each one of these worlds through these holes. But then someone came along and sealed it off with some sort of magic shield. And now you can't do it anymore. Now you have to go around and go through Sir Warp. Okay. Once again, they're telling us a lot of shit here. And I'm willing to give it a little slack if it all ends up meaning something. This needs to be important to the overall story here, right? Now, throughout this, we're also getting a little bit of character development from Glorio, because Supreme Kai is asking him questions. He's kind of mysterious. Supreme Kai is clearly suspicious of him. He's not really giving up too much, so we don't exactly know what his true intentions are throughout all of this. So, I guess we'll have to see. We end up seeing a big statue of Dabura here as well, which I was a little bit confused here because I thought that they were on the third demon world, and I thought that they established that Dabura was the king of the first demon world, right? Because this demon world isn't the one that Goma was on. They're trying to get to that one, but they have to go through this one first. You see what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of confusing. If you're someone who only watched this episode once, and I've watched it 3 times now, but if you only watched it once, you're probably going to be really confused by all of this, because there's a statue of Dabura on this world, and I'm not even sure that this is the world that he was the king of, but maybe I missed that. It's totally possible that I missed that. So we also get a moment where Goku decides he wants to breathe some fresh demon realm air for some reason. Okay, so they stop, they get out, we get some kind of humorous moments and things like that. So we learn something about the air on this world. Okay, and for those of us that are very, very familiar with Dragon Ball Z, we know that it's not a foreign concept for them to go somewhere and the gravity be different or the air be different, and it pose some sort of a challenge to the people that are trying to walk around, fight, fly, etc. So it's not completely new to us. But I'll say this, it really feels like the only reason why they're even going into this whole explanation about this is so they can justify Goku not immediately being able to just whoop everyone's asses on this planet. Right? Because we got to remember, Goku has been turned back into a kid here, but this is, by this point, right after the Buu saga, Goku is Super Saiyan 3 at this point. He's super strong. Obviously we know he's not going to be as strong now because he's been turned into a kid. He's having trouble learning his body and learning his range and even being able to do certain things again. But I feel like this is just another hurdle that they kind of decided to put in his path to justify, okay, we're going to bring our heroes kind of back to the basics here, because we know had they not done that and they go into this world, theoretically, Goku would have just been strong enough to just whoop all the asses that he would have come across. And that's not challenging, right? That's not fun. It's not fun to watch. You have to provide these conflicts and these hurdles for your characters in order for it to be some sort of worthwhile story. Am I thrilled with the way they're handling it? Not necessarily. And I've been pretty lenient on the turning them into kids thing and the sort of excuses about them having to get used to these bodies and not being able to regulate their ki the same way. And because there's a history in Dragon Ball Z of that being a thing with new bodies and stuff like that, and them having to kind of figure things out. So that's not a completely new concept. So I've been willing to kind of let it go. But this one just feels really, really, really convenient. Like, it's like, oh, okay, well, there's this really thick sort of, mist from these volcanoes that are being released on this planet that makes everything move a little bit slower in the air to be a little bit heavier. Right. But we also know that Goku is trained at how many times gravity at this point? Okay, we saw him on King Kai's planet with all the gravity challenges there. We've seen him in, just the hyperbolic time chamber with all the gravity challenges there. We've also seen him training in spaceships at however many times gravity. So it does seem a little bit crazy that this would be a problem for him. But once again, they're just trying to it's almost like they're trying to reset their powers, right? So that we can actually have a story here. Because otherwise they're running into the same problem that they ran into in Dragon Ball Super, whereas, which was every single villain that they come across has to be stronger than them. Otherwise they're not a threat. And we all know how strong they were by that point. So it's so crazy to think that they could be anyone stronger than that. But then of course they introduced Beerus and Jiren and characters like that. Just this stupendous level of power scaling that has long been out of control. And now this is their attempt to kind of bring it back a little bit, at least for this story, to try to make this thing actually be a challenge by turning him into kids and introducing this gravity sort of challenge that's on this planet. Now, throughout a lot more of this, we get Supreme Kai also kind of, just kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Interrogating Glorio, trying to find more about his real reasons. He's a little bit suspicious of him, and I think he should be. I'll say this about Glorio. I was hoping, and I realized that it's really, really early in the series for me to say this. But as of right now, I was really hoping a lot more from this character. I was hoping for a lot more. So far, he just kind of feels like just a generic anime character. And what I mean by that is like, a lot of anime, there's always this one character who's super cool and, a loner, and he's kind of stoic and kind of quiet. And, he's just like, what I mean? It's just very, very somber. And I feel like that's what this guy is. And we're not getting much personality out of him right now, but I'm not going to assume that that's a bad thing. It's still very, 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 very early. But that's the vibe I'm getting from him right now. And I hope we get a little bit more, because it can be very, very tricky when you introduce these new characters. If you guys listen to my previous podcast, you know that I was not a big fan of Jocko. I just didn't care for that character at all. So they might have gone a little bit too far with him. Okay. And maybe now they're not going quite far enough with this guy. But once again, very, very early. Hopefully we learn enough about him to where this very, mundane sort of presence and personality, matters. And maybe there's a reason for it. Okay, so, this is, oh gosh, I'm having a hard time talking about this episode, guys. Okay, I hope it's not obvious. Maybe it is. But there's not a lot going on here. We spend most of the episode just in a spaceship with them commenting on their surroundings, which is not doing anything for the plot. It is sort of building out the world and explaining where we are, which I appreciate. But I also wonder if maybe there's a better way to do that than basically spending an entire episode on it like they did here. Because all we end up doing here is ending up at this hotel on this demon planet where they end up spending the night there. And then they they get into this fucking fight at a bar. I mean, it's very, very Western, right? It's sort of a trope of like Western movies and shows where it's the lone gunman and the gunslingers are coming into town, and they walk into the hotel and try to get a room, and they walk into the bar, the whatever they call them, the saloon, and they try to get a drink, but then they get accosted by some people who are like, "You're not from around here, are you?" Like that just, I mean, it's such an overly done trope, I think, that I'm not sure that it's really that effective here. I mean, not only have we seen it in Westerns and so many other movies and shows that were inspired by Westerns. Star Wars did it, okay, with the cantina. I mean, all of that is kind of a similar vibe here. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, they're just taking inspiration from a very, very popular genre of film and TV. But it's just not that thrilling here because we're just meeting all of these people, this new place at the same time, and we're learning about Glorio here a little bit too. So I guess it serves as an avenue of character development for him, but he reacts exactly the way I assumed he would have reacted when they're accosted by these guys, just very, very sort of, just volatile and just ready to get into it. Now I'll say this, what I do like about this scene, and this is a pro, because I know I've been kind of negative here. This is a pro of how they're handling this whole thing with the air being super thick and super heavy and all of that. And it kind of resetting Goku's abilities a little bit, is that we now get to get some actual choreographed fight scenes that look pretty cool. So I think this whole sequence, action wise, was very well done. Right. And we don't usually get these types of fight scenes in Dragon Ball because they're all so stupid, ridiculously strong by this point, to where it's just a bunch of teleporting and super fast fighting and a bunch of punches and kicks, which, don't get me wrong, it's great when it's done right. I mean, we all love that. But something fun about making everything move a little bit more slowly is the fact that we actually get to see these fight scenes kind of play out. Right? It's not just a bunch of it's not just a lot of that going on, because that's what we're used to, right? When these two titans are fighting each other, it's always super fast. We can't really see what's going on. There's no time for them to really get cool and creative with the fight choreography, and they're able to do that now by justifying it by saying, hey, because of this environment that we're in, everything is heavier and it moves more slowly. So if there had to be a plus side to that story decision, it would be that hopefully we'll get a lot more of really cool, nicely animated, choreographed fight scenes in this show, because that's something that, once again, we don't get much of anymore. If you go back and you watch the Rock the Dragon intro for the early Ocean dub of Dragon Ball Z, and most of that footage is from the movies Tree of Might, Lord Slug, stuff like that. That was back when maybe not Lord Slug, maybe before that. But there's a lot of like really cool fight choreography happening there, where you see Goku duck from a sword. You see him backflip out of the way of a thing, and they got to a certain point to where you just didn't really see much of that anymore, because they're just fighting so fast, or they would slow it down so much to where it just would be a really powerful punch to the gut. But here they're able to kind of play it out and have a little bit more fun with it. So of course, Goku wipes the floor with these fools, and I would have thought nothing more of it. You know what I mean? Of course. And what's funny about it is that he's also kind of eating these hamburgers at the same time. So at the very least, it serves as a humorous, well choreographed, nicely animated fight sequence that was sort of made to be justified by the environment that they've created and how his body works and moves in this world. Okay. This one scene is probably involved the most, most of the talking about this is coming from this one scene, because this is the most interesting thing to me. The rest of this was just a bunch of sort of exposition where they're just kind of riding and talking about stuff. So they end up passing out at the night, and we see these two guys kind of running around us, and they're going to pay for this. So Goku just whooped all these dudes' ass, Goku and Glorio, and then they realize that their ship has been stolen. And that's pretty much where the episode ends. Once again, not the most exciting episode. I can't say I was crazy about it. I do appreciate what they're doing here. Like, they're trying to build out the world and explain what all this stuff is. But there are ways to do that and still keep it interesting. And I don't feel like they did that. Like, maybe had they cut back to Earth every now and then and picked up with that and be like, okay, well, let's see where Bulma is with this ship. Let's see what Vegito and Piccolo are up to. You know, let's see how they're preparing for this trip too. I don't think we need an entire episode where we just watch them basically just go to the demon world. I mean, and then just go to sleep and get into a little fight. It's just not a good start. It's not a good start. Anyway, we'll talk more about it for sure. What do you guys think about it? What are you saying? Send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com. With that being said, I'm going to switch over to that email segment where I do have a couple of emails, and I also have an audio recording from one of my old listeners, Ricky. And if you guys listen to the previous podcast, you know that every now and then, I don't remember exactly how many times, probably maybe 2 or 3 times, I would get an audio email from Ricky, and I usually just play it. Because it's just fun. Why not? It's something fun and extra to do. And I appreciate, Ricky, you taking the time to record those. And it's always glad to hear from you, man. But we will jump back into your audio recording in a minute. We'll just go ahead and touch upon these other ones here first. So the first one that I got here is from, I don't know exactly how to pronounce this. J-Ro, maybe, we'll just say J-Ro. Very, very short and sweet email. The subject line says plot hole. And then the email reads, hey, wasn't Piccolo a grown ass man when he was like 8 while training Gohan? And that's it. That's just it. J-Ro, it felt more like a comment than maybe like an email. Remember, you guys can also leave comments. If you listen on Spotify, you can also leave comments on the actual episodes now as well. Because this isn't, this isn't the type of thing I would normally kind of dive into during what he's saying. But since you mentioned it, I'll touch upon it. I think what J-Ro is, first of all, thank you so much for writing. And this is hilarious to me. But I think what you're maybe referencing there, it says, hey, wasn't Piccolo a grown ass man when he was like 8 while training Gohan? It's a little bit confusing, but I think maybe what you could be referencing there is the fact that Piccolo is a lot younger than he looks, right? He's actually younger than Goku by quite a bit. And I think we always kind of think of Piccolo as being an older guy because he's so wise and the way he carries himself, and he just kind of seems like that. But he's actually pretty young because he was, of course, a copy, more or less, of King Piccolo. That was, King Piccolo spit out an egg after Goku defeated him and basically duplicated himself into a new body. And that's how we got Piccolo Jr., right? But Piccolo Jr. is obviously younger because he was born as a result of that fight. Now, but because he's a Namekian, which this is where the sort of consistency of, the story and the lore kind of gets really, really muddy. But we were led to believe that Piccolo, he grew a lot faster. His growth was accelerated by a lot more because he was a Namekian. And I think the real reason that they did it is because they just wanted him to hurry up and fight and grow up so he can fight Goku. I think it was just a poor writing choice. They decided to do this egg thing, and they needed to find a reason to get him to be a threat to Goku. So they decided to age him up really, really quickly. And they decided to just say, oh, it's because his species does that. Even though that doesn't seem to be ringing true with Dende. Okay. Dende seems to be aging at a fairly normal rate for Namekians. Now, obviously we've gone back in time here than where we picked up at Super and in Dragon Ball GT. So I can't say that for sure. But it does seem like Dende's kind of, aging at a more normal rate. So, the plot holes you're right. Look, moral of the story is it a plot hole? I don't see how that's a plot hole. So, because you didn't, I'm not sure you elaborated enough for me to understand what you mean, but he was a grown man, but he was also not, basically, when he was training Gohan. Yes. So you're probably wondering, well, how can he train a kid if he's still a kid himself? Maybe. Well, we don't know everything there is to know about Namekians and the way their brains work and the way they absorb information. And, if he aged super quickly, then maybe he was able to also learn super quickly and maintain a lot of information. And basically he grew up faster and, he still did a lot. He still did a lot of training. And I think since King Piccolo transferred all of his knowledge to Piccolo Jr., right? That would also explain how he was able to train someone, even though he wasn't that old himself, because he was also, he had the knowledge that both Kami and King Piccolo would have had as well, right? Unless I'm missing something. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's what you were getting at there. Okay, next one says here, this is from Adrian. What are you saying? Hello, Tim. It's Adrian from Instagram. I continue to love the show and your insight. You always find the perfect balance of humor and genuine questions and the ability to suspend your belief because, well, we know Dragon Ball, LOL, and I don't have a question concerning the show yet, but I do have a thought exercise to scratch your brain. Would it have been healthier for the show if Goku had stayed dead after the Cell arc? I understand he is the mascot for the show and a fan favorite, but it was an excellent opportunity for Dragon Ball to evolve, where Gohan becomes Earth's new savior. I don't believe much would change in the Buu arc. There would have to be a different concept on how he was released from his prison, and I believe would have made it very interesting if Gohan had to find a way out of the situation of Super Buu and having his underdog superhero story completed in this universe. I believe Dragon Ball Super could have been an opportunity to expand on Vegeta, not to go crazy in depth, just a thought exercise. Again, I love the show. Keep it going, man. Adrian, thank you so much for the email. And yes, Adrian also messaged me you also hit me up on Instagram every now and then. I appreciate you always, liking the posts and participating in that way and just being a very engaging listener, man. So I appreciate that. And obviously, thank you for the compliments as always. Okay, so we're just going to back up here and get back to your main question here, which is, would it have been healthier for the show if Goku had stayed dead after the Cell arc? Okay, so I believe that the initial plan, and most of you guys probably already know this, and you probably know it even better than me, because sometimes my memory is very fuzzy on these things, but I believe the initial plan, was for Dragon Ball Z was for it to end after the Frieza arc, and that is with the explosion of Namek and Goku supposedly being dead and etc. And I think that they were considering ending it there, but then they decided to bring it back and continue it. But then they decided that, and I think Akira Toriyama was considering maybe ending it again for the final time, when Goku sacrificed himself against Cell in that fight at the very end, which he ended up sacrificing himself for absolutely nothing because Cell just regenerated and formed Ultra Perfect Cell. So had Goku remained dead, because I believe the plan there was for him to stay dead. And that's why when it comes back for the next season, it's focused on Gohan, right? Gohan's in high school. We're spending a lot of time with him as the great Saiyaman and all that stuff, and Goku was dead. And then, of course, I think based on fan reaction, they decided to bring Goku back to life, because I think people didn't know how to handle Dragon Ball without Goku being there. And I would also say that they weren't doing a very good job of making Gohan enough of an interesting character for us to not miss Goku, right? Now, what I like about Goku and Gohan is that they're both very, very different characters. Goku's just kind of this man child who's also a really, really badass fighter and a great hero, with a heart of gold and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, Gohan's a little bit more reserved. He's studious. He's book smart. He doesn't like to fight. So I think there's an interesting dynamic between the two of them. And when you're used to having a series led by Goku and the way he is, and all of a sudden you switch over to Gohan, who's not like that at all, then that was probably a tough sell for people. No pun intended there with sell. Yeah, that was probably a very, very tough sell for people. So I don't know had it been better or not. I think they would have had to really lean into Gohan's character, and maybe they could have done some really, really fun things because, Gohan is a bit of a deeper character than a lot of the other characters on the show. Certainly Goku. We learned a lot about Gohan. We got to see him grow up and see him be raised in this world where he had to fight as a child against some pretty, devastating creatures and villains that killed his friends and hurt his dad and hurt him and tried to kill him. So it would have been interesting to see how he could have turned out on his own due to that history that he had, as well as putting him in positions to where he was forced to fight even though he didn't want to. And I think that's one of the more interesting aspects of Gohan. So I feel like had they leaned into that, they could have come up with some really, really creative things. But then the other part of me just feels like they would have done the same silly bullshit, and that is just make up convenient stuff that just for the sake of, trying to tell some half-assed story involving Majin Buu, because a lot of that, we all know that the Buu arc was not great. And a lot of those decisions that they made there weren't great. So I don't know if they would have made better decisions if Goku hadn't been brought back from the dead. Maybe they would have made Gohan and Vegeta fuse instead of Goku and Gohan. We were just talking about this. We were just talking about Goku and Gohan potentially fusing with the Potara earrings and what their name could have been. And I guess in that scenario, it's possible that Gohan and Vegeta could have fused. Now, since we got into it on the previous conversation, now I feel like we have to touch upon it here as well. What would their name have been, right? Gohan and Vegeta, had they fused with the Potara earrings? Okay, let's see. Well, Gogeta is already taken. Okay, so that pretty much leaves us with what? Vegan. Oh my goodness. Vegan. It would have to be like vegan, right? But if you spelled it out, I think it would be vegan. Vegan, right? I don't know. Yeah. So that could have been interesting to see those two fuse, but I don't know if it would have been better. I think by that point, Goku is so heavily established as the face of the franchise. You mentioned that he's the mascot of the show. And I just don't think people would have bought into Gohan the way that they bought into Goku, especially considering what they ended up doing with Gohan later on, which people weren't very happy about. Gohan was the man during the Cell arc. That Super Saiyan 2 transformation is still one of the best moments in the history of the show. And then we all know he just got, gradually kind of got weaker, after Z. Certainly in the first half of Super, he was useless. I just feel like they didn't know what to do with Gohan, and that's why they went the direction that they went in. They decided to bring Goku back, and if what they did with Gohan and Super is any indication, I don't necessarily think Z would have been better with him as the main character. I think that's probably the best way I can say it, based on what we saw. Now, granted, we had a huge gap of time in between both of these series with different writers. So maybe it would have turned out differently. But yeah, I'm not sure. Would it have been cool to see him find a way out of the situation with Boo and all of that? Yeah, it's kind of hard to say how that would have turned out now. Considering the way Boo was ultimately defeated, and that was with a super powerful spirit bomb, of which Gohan would not have known how to do. He would not have known how to do that spirit bomb. So that means some other aspect would have had to have been figured out. But in the Dragon Ball world, they could have just made up whatever the hell they wanted. right? Maybe all of a sudden, oh, Gohan knows how to do the spirit bomb. So it could have turned out anyway. Any different way. Anyway, Adrian, I probably went a little bit too deeply into that, man, but I thank you for your email there. I'm going to move on to Andrew, and then we're going to come back and close it out with Ricky's audio email. Andrew, one of my longtime listeners. Subject line here says, thoughts through episode 3. Hey there, Tim. Enjoying the podcast so far. Already told you previously, but I'm very glad you're back doing this and happy to hear you have some old listeners now coming out of the woodwork. To help support your Crunchyroll and other costs, I'd be happy to float you some cash if you had a medium to do that through. But either way, I'm glad you're back to podcasting. Well, let me just stop there for a second, Andrew, and tell you, man, first of all, obviously, always thrilled to hear from you. I'm not sure how to respond. I definitely appreciate you wanting to offer up some cash, man. I just don't know exactly how I would go about doing that. I mean, I as we all know, there's no ads on this podcast. There were no ads on the previous podcast. Maybe I'll have ads on this one if people continue to listen. I don't know. But I did have a Patreon back then, and I don't remember if you were a member of the Patreon or not. I don't recall that, but that would have been the best way to kind of financially contribute to the show if you just wanted to do that. I feel weird just taking, money from people for no reason. Like I feel like I have to be giving you something in return, which in all fairness, I am giving I'm giving you guys, content to listen to, but I don't, that's a very weird thing for me. But I can tell you what I have been considering, and the rest of you guys can let me know if this is something that you're interested in participating in. I was thinking about doing merch for the podcast. I got a couple of questions about it during the previous podcast, just like maybe some t-shirts or something like that. And I never really got around to doing it, but I have been considering doing it for this podcast when and if it seems like a good idea to do it. Meaning I have enough listeners there to where it would be worth going through the quote unquote trouble to have designs made up, and the costs that would be associated with that, or the work that would be associated with that. So I'm definitely considering doing that. If anyone else would be interested in that, let me know. I have to just get enough people, have to get enough feedback. And if you guys are interested in that, that would be a really, really cool way to kind of support the show. Because I feel weird. I think some shows maybe do like tip links and stuff like that. And that would be something that I would consider doing. If you just wanted to donate just to support the show because you appreciate the content, because you see some value in it. But I don't know right now that I have enough people that would be interested in doing that. So I don't want to set that up. And I'd feel bad if only you did it, Andrew, but I appreciate you saying that. And we're definitely going to revisit this conversation. Okay. So thank you for offering that. Okay. Let's continue on with your email. Just a heads up though, I think there may may finally be a second Andrew out there in the vocal audience. I think episode 1, you mentioned an Andrew that left a review or a comment on Spotify. I use Apple Podcasts, so that definitely was a different Andrew. Although this idea of commenting on individual episodes is cool, so I may switch over for the show if you utilize polls and stuff. Okay, well, let's talk about that for a second. Okay, I know it's confusing, but I definitely have at least 2 Andrews, and I remember now this has been a while. It's been a couple years since we talked about this, but I did designate one of you guys Andrew number 1. And I also had Andrew number 2. And you were, I don't remember which one of those you were. I believe you might have been number 1 because correct me if I'm wrong, but you also listened to Republic City Report back in the day, right? I'm sorry. It's just been so many years. I can't remember every person, but I certainly remember my regular listeners, but I definitely had an Andrew 1 and an Andrew number 2. So I may have been talking about the other Andrew there. But it stands to reason that I probably have a couple of people named Andrew that listen, but I know there's definitely 2 of you guys that I've talked to many, many times. So it's just possible I was talking about the other one there. Okay. It says here, regarding the show so far, it's been a bit of a slow build, especially this episode 3. Not much action. I know they're fleshing out the demon world, but it's been moving a bit slow for me is all. Animation quality is fantastic, enjoying the voice acting, and I appreciate the different take on the Dragon Ball universe that the show gives. I'm just impatient, I guess. Well, Andrew, I just kind of went through my whole thoughts on this episode, so I'm with you. Very, very slow, not much action. And the action, depending on how you look at it, was very underwhelming considering what we've seen from these characters in this world. But at the same time, kind of cool because we got to kind of get a slower, more fluid fight choreographed scene, a kind of thing that we don't get in Dragon Ball a lot. So I appreciated it for that much, but yeah, for that reason, or at least, to that extent. But yes, very, very, very slow. Okay. Very slow. It was kind of a pain having to watch it again, if I'm being honest with you. Okay, your last section here says, unpopular opinion, but I really wouldn't mind seeing more of Goten and Kid Trunks in an action scene, in an action sense. Doesn't seem like that would happen in this show, but due to all the power scaling, basically all the human characters are irrelevant at this point, so having them utilize the rest of the Saiyans, not via Gotenks, I personally would enjoy that if done right. Looking forward to your next episode, Andrew. Andrew, thank you so much. And I did want to mention this. There are some confusions with Andrews and other people like that. And I tend to not say you guys' last names. I'm sure you already noticed that. Just because to me, the emails are private, right? Because you're privately emailing me and I'm reading them on the podcast. But it's not like you're posting this out to the world. So I don't usually use you guys' last names. Obviously, if I did that, it'd be easier to distinguish which one of you guys it is I'm talking about, right? But unless you post it publicly, I'm just going to give your first name. So just keep that in mind. So thank you so much for sending this in. So you're saying that you wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of Goten and Kid Trunks in an action sense. Well, I wouldn't mind it if they figured out a really cool way to do it. I mean, I just think that they started off on a very, very bad foot with making both of those characters Super Saiyans at such a young age. I don't think anyone wanted to see that. It completely spit in the face of all the other transformations that we had seen before, where those characters actually had to go through things and lose people, and people got killed, and they lost important people in their lives and had to go through, inner turmoil to reach those levels, like in the case of Vegeta. And then those two just basically stump their toes and become Super Saiyans. So they started off really, really bad. I actually didn't mind a lot of the world tournament stuff. I thought that stuff was funny. With them competing in the tournament in the kids division, I didn't have a problem with that. To me, it made perfect sense that they would introduce a kids division. It never made sense in the original Dragon Ball, where Goku was a kid fighting these grown ass adults. So when they introduced that in that arc, I was like, oh, not only does this make sense from a story standpoint, but it also gives Goten and Trunks an avenue so they can get some action as well. And I thought all of that stuff was funny. The Mighty Mask thing, I thought all that stuff was great. Gotenks, on the other hand, I think it's safe to say that that just wasn't the greatest idea. Okay, they just did way too much, and when Gotenks showed up, we felt like we were watching a completely different show. So my point is this: if they find a way to do it in a way that makes sense and feels like it makes sense for those characters and the situations that they're involved in, then I'm all for it. But if they do the messy Gotenks thing where they just fuse and then get their asses whooped, then I can do without that. So, but yeah, if they found a way to do it, I'd be cool with it. Don't think we're going to get that in Daima because they're babies, right? Unless they turn back before this series is over, I think they're out of the picture for this entire series. When they inevitably bring back Super as an anime one day, or they continue to do the movies, yes, I would love to see them as teenagers, because they were grown up in Dragon Ball Superhero, right? So they decided they wanted to kind of focus in on them and do something cool there with those characters. I'd be down for it. Andrew, thank you so much, man. Thank you for being a listener for as long as you have. And, I'm sure I'll hear from you again. Okay. At this point, we're going to switch over to our last email for the evening. And this is going to be, of course, an audio recording from my buddy, Ricky. Ricky and I, we've never actually met in real life. You guys that have been listening to this, I'm not sure if I made this clear or not. It's not like he's just a buddy of mine and he just sends in audio recordings. We have not actually met for real in real life. He's a fan. He is a listener that just decided to send me an audio recording one day. And since he's well spoken and he has good points to make and he has very good quality, I decided to share it on the podcast. I can't say that I would do that for everyone, but I've done it in the past for Ricky, so I'll do it again. So Ricky says, welcome back. One of my favorite podcasters is back. Here are my thoughts. So we're going to go and play Ricky's audio recording here, and I'm going to come back and address some of the things he mentioned there. And then we'll go ahead and wrap it up and close it out for this week. So the next voice you hear will be from Ricky.
Previously on Ricky Interrupting Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Super podcast. Hey, Tim, man, Dragon Ball Super, the superhero movie was great. I loved it the way they made Piccolo a main character, and Gohan's new form was so cool, if not a little short-lived. After years of training and no podcast to be seen, Tim Bridgewater has returned, and Ricky has too. Hey, Tim, I'm back. How's it going? So we are 2 episodes deep into Dragon Ball Daima, and I'm going to be honest with you. I was going to skip this whole series until I heard that you were doing a podcast. Thank you for the email, by the way. Yeah, so I've watched the first 2 episodes now, waiting on the third, and I am not super thrilled about this series the way it's going so far. We have retconned so much stuff. We've retconned Kibito and Supreme Kai, them separating because Dragon Ball Super hasn't happened yet, and I guess we needed them to be 2 different characters instead of 1 character. We've retconned Piccolo's knowledge. He somehow knows about the Namekian that was in the demon realm, even though he didn't know he was a Namekian until the Frieza saga. I understand that he fused with Nail and everything, and he's fused with Kami, but Kami didn't even know he was a Namekian until Piccolo knew he was a Namekian. And then on top of all that, we have the whole transforming into kids thing, which isn't the worst thing ever. However, it is weird that they are that they're playing off the idea that like the kids don't know how to control their own bodies or anything. Like Goku's been fighting since he was like 6 years old. Like he's been fighting his whole life. He knows how to control his body and everything, and so the fact that he's having to like retrain himself is kind of cool because he doesn't have the same reach and everything with his legs. But it's weird that they're like things like knowing how to fly. They're having trouble with that. That's strange. And then additionally, you have these new villains who their whole motivation behind them causing this whole conspiracy of shrinking Goku and the rest of the crew is to prevent them from going after the demon realm and attacking the demon realm because of how strong they are. Yet this action to shrink them all sets forth the chain reaction of them going to the demon realm. This is all very, I'm going to say, interesting writing. It's not the best. But I'm sticking with it. I'll stick with it as long as you're doing the podcast. I'll be calling it again at some time. So, again, great to hear from you. Love hearing your voice on the podcast. I'll be back. See ya. Oh, also, additionally, if Goku and Gohan were to fuse, I think the best name, and this is the most straightforward in my opinion, this is top-notch naming for a fusion between Goku and Gohan. I think he would be called Gokon. That's right.
Okay, Ricky, man, first of all, thank you so much for sending that in. I literally laughed out loud when I heard the intro and the way you kind of presented it there, with it being a throwback to Dragon Ball Super and the recap, and basically kind of following up on what I did for the intros to the first 2 episodes of this podcast. So I appreciate you taking the time and doing that, man. It's very, very creative and very, very cool. So I appreciate that. Also very, very nice to hear your voice again as well, man. I had forgotten that you had also sent in a recording when we talked about Dragon Ball Superhero too. So I appreciate you still sticking around and being a listener. And it is very, very interesting to me Because I've had a couple people, I believe, mention this, is that they weren't even going to watch Daima at all. And then they found out that I was doing a podcast about it, and then that made them decide to watch it. I need you guys to go to Funimation and tell them that. Go to Spotify and tell them that. Go to Apple Podcasts and tell them that. Hey, if it was not for Tim Bridgewater, we wouldn't even be watching this show right now. And who knows, maybe they'll push it to a bigger audience, because that's incredible, man. I hope you end up enjoying it. It's kind of starting off in a very, very rocky sort of a way right now, as you yourself have mentioned as well. But I appreciate you giving it a chance and also giving this podcast another chance as well. So let's just touch upon a couple things that you mentioned in your recording. You mentioned that them transforming into kids wasn't the worst thing, but them not being able to control the bodies is kind of weird because, Goku has been fighting his entire life and things like that. And I kind of touched upon a lot of that. I ultimately just think that they just needed a reason. They just wanted to turn them back into kids. So they found the quote unquote best reason that they could to do that. And then they also needed to be able to explain them also not being as strong as they were as adults. And the best way to do that was to say, oh, now that they're kids again, they kind of have to relearn their abilities and stuff like that. Not thrilled with that, but it does kind of make sense to me in that sense. You also mentioned the conversation that Piccolo was having with, I believe it was Mr. Popo, where they were talking about Namekians being in the demon realm and sort of the history regarding that. And I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I wanted to mention that too during the episode talk for that episode, but I just forgot. Because my initial reaction there was also, well, how the hell does Piccolo know that? Like, I remember thinking about that. I was like, he didn't even know he was from Namek, so he shouldn't know anything about Namekian history, or certainly nothing that goes back as far as the demon realm. But then I justified it by saying, oh, but that's right, he fused with Kami again, and Kami should have known that. But as you pointed out, and I had forgotten this, even Kami didn't know he was a Namekian until Piccolo found out, right? So I don't know. Like that's definitely a tricky one. Now, what I have thought about since then, because I found myself trying to justify this storytelling decision as well, is that Piccolo spent quite a bit of time with, well, also you did mention this as well, Piccolo did fuse with Nail, right? So it stands to reason that maybe Nail knew about it, right? That wouldn't be the craziest thing. But also, Piccolo did end up spending some time with the other Namekians, right? If I'm remembering correctly. On Namek, damn near all of the remaining Namekians were wiped out by Frieza and Frieza's crew, right? Including Guru, right? And Mori, some of the other elder Namekians. But then they were all brought back to life with the Dragon Balls when there was a wish made about, bringing back everyone that Frieza killed on Namek, and also those who may have been inadvertently affected by Frieza, like Guru, because Guru wasn't actually killed by Frieza per se, but he died earlier than he would have because of Frieza's tyranny and watching all of his children be massacred and stuff by Frieza, right? So they brought them all back to life, and then they transported them all to Earth right before Namek exploded. Now, there was a time period that happened in between them getting their own new planet again and the time them arriving on Earth. I don't know exactly how long that was. That would have been long enough for the Dragon Balls to become active again. Now, it stands to reason that Piccolo could have used that time to get to know all of those Namekians, the elders, and Guru. So during that time, maybe one of them could have explained the history of the Namekians to them. And I feel like that's probably a better explanation. But of course, since we didn't see any of that, we can only speculate about it. Okay. And there another very good point that you brought up. Because I talked about this too, kind of sort of in the first episode. It's how their motivation, the whole motivation of the villains, this being Goma and Degasu in Dragon Ball Daima, is they don't want these super strong Z fighters to come to the demon realm. right? That's their fear at this point, because Arinsu kind of plants that idea in their heads. So now Goma's thinking, oh man, they defeated Majin Buu. Like, we can't have them coming here, right? So then that sets this chain of events into motion that inevitably just ends up bringing them to the demon realm. Right? And that, my friend, is one of the best and worst writing decisions that they have somehow made here, because now they're going to the demon realm, whereas before they weren't thinking about the demon realm. They couldn't have cared less about the demon realm. They were minding their own damn business, partying it up for Trunks' birthday. And now they're going to the demon realm, which is exactly what Goma did not want them to do. So that, from a writing perspective, you're absolutely right. That's just not great. And you did mention at the very end there, going back to the potential name for a fusion between Goku and Gohan being Gokhan. Okay, and that is one that I did not bring up before. Initially, is because I honestly didn't think about it. But I also want to shout out Adrian on Instagram, because he did actually mention that previously as well. He responded to one of my posts about it, and he said Gokhan would be a good name. So I forgot to mention that. So I did have another listener that also said that too. And yeah, I guess you guys are right. I guess Gokhan probably would be the best sort of combination that you could come up with out of those two names. Anyway, that about does it for our email segment, guys. So if you have something you want to say, any comments, questions, or anything like that, send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com for our email segment. What are you saying? I want to thank you guys again for joining me this week. Not the best episode, but hey, we've been here before, okay? Because we all know that Dragon Ball Super had its share of really shitty episodes too. In some ways, this episode of Daima almost kind of felt like filler, but it wasn't filler, because we were going to the location that we were supposed to be at, and we're learning things about the world that we're in. But other than that, it didn't really seem to advance much of the story or anything. But with that being said, we've gotten bad episodes of Dragon Ball Z. We've gotten bad episodes of Dragon Ball GT. For goodness sakes, we did. And we've also gotten bad episodes of Dragon Ball Super. So I'm not going to let this deter me. I'm still going to be here every week for the foreseeable future. Okay. We'll see what happens 2 or 3 episodes from now, and we'll stick with it, and hopefully it'll get better. So yeah, with that being said, not the greatest episode, but that's all right. They can't all be winners, right? Anyway, I want to thank you guys. So look, take a take a second to leave me a review, over on Apple Podcasts. If you feel up to it, you can also leave me a rating. You can just quickly tap 5 stars on Spotify. If you're a listener over there, you don't even have to type anything out. You can just hit 5 stars and move on with your day. And a very, very small gesture like that from you will go a long way in helping me out to get the podcast out to a broader audience. And also follow me on Instagram, Rock the Dragon Podcast on Instagram. Also, there's also a YouTube channel, Rock the Dragon Podcast. I'm updating both of those relatively frequently now with video content. So if you just want to have a little something extra to just watch, check it out. You can go follow me or subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of here, guys. So with that being said, for this episode of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast, I'm your host, Tim Bridgewater. Thank you guys. And see you next time. Keep on rocking the dragon.